Three, two, one.
Hello and good Sunday morning. Hope you guys are having a great time out there. Well, we are getting closer and closer every week to the start of the NFL season. That's why last week we started previews, some division previews. Today I am going to be continuing looking at the AFC North. It was the NFC North last time. Today is the AFC North. Going to be looking at each team in order of how they finished last year. And then at the end, giving some thoughts on the division. We are going to kick off with the Baltimore Ravens. They were the first place team last year. They finished as 12-5. Among their losses, quarterback Josh Johnson left the roster, wide receiver Deontay Johnson left the roster, and cornerback Tre'Davious White. But they brought in Cooper Rush from Dallas to be the backup quarterback. They signed DeAndre Hopkins, a new wide receiver, to give them some depth. And they brought in Jair Alexander after he was released from the Packers to be a new corner. Last year, fantasy finishes, Lamar Jackson finished as QB1. Derrick Henry, who was a big free agent acquisition last year, finished as RB4, while Justice Hill, their change of pace guy, was RB37. Zay Flowers, their top receiver, was wide receiver 25. Rashad Bateman was wide receiver 40. Hopkins, who played for the Titans and the Chiefs, finished as wide receiver 49. Mark Andrews, tight end 6. Isaiah Likely, tight end 16. This is a good and an interesting team. I think Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, easily top 12 at their position, probably top 5 at their positions. Henry, not as much of a pass catcher, does a lot of his damage rushing, but this seems to be an ideal fit, a team that wants to have a power rushing game. He's still hanging in there, doing well for that team. Passing game is where it gets a little more interesting. I still think Zay Flowers is the receiver that I prefer. Low-end wide receiver 2, maybe high-end wide receiver 3. I think Hopkins and Bateman going to continue to produce and be a part of this offense, between wide receiver 4 and 5, may be hit or miss from week to week. Mark Andrews still there, probably still the number 1 tight end for one more year, but we're seeing more involvement from Isaiah Likely. They're both worth rostering. Andrews is the one, though, I would be more comfortable betting on a week to week basis. Still a pretty solid offense, pretty good defense. I expect them to compete pretty well. Number 2 team in the division last year was the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers finished as 10-7, made the playoffs out in the wild card round. They cleaned house once again at quarterback. Russell Wilson left for the Giants. Justin Fields left for the Jets, both in New York. They're starting running back Najee Harris now with the Los Angeles Chargers. Wide receiver Van Jefferson now with the Tennessee Titans. Wide receiver Mike Williams went back to the Chargers. They traded wide receiver George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys, and DeMonte Casey left at safety. So as you might expect, they're remaking this offense. Aaron Rodgers comes in at quarterback, was with the Jets. Mason Rudolph was with the Titans, returns to the Steelers. Will Howard, a quarterback they picked up in the draft. They also traded for wide receiver DK Metcalf from the Seattle Seahawks, brought in veteran wide receiver Robert Woods, and they drafted Caleb Johnson at running back. They also added safety Juan Thornhill. This last week, they brought in Jonnu Smith, a tight end from the Miami Dolphins. They traded away their safety, but they brought in a corner in Jalen Ramsey. So they are kind of remaking this team. Fantasy finishes last year. Aaron Rodgers was QB 15 for the Jets. Rudolph finished as QB 36 for the Titans. Jaylen Warren, one of the few offensive mainstays sticking around, was running back 39. Metcalf was wide receiver 33 for the Seahawks. Calvin Austin, wide receiver 69, kind of a slot guy for them. Pat Freiermuth, tight end 9, now facing some increased competition with Jonnu Smith. So what do we expect here? The Jets were not a good team last year, but Aaron Rodgers, if you looked at his numbers, it wasn't too bad, and it wasn't very far off of what he did his last year with the Packers, so he doesn't seem to have been significantly hampered by that Achilles injury. He's 1 year further removed. They're trying to build a veteran core around him. He has typically been more of a wide receiver guy, and yet now they have two premium tight ends. That more fits the mold of what Arthur Smith likes to do. The last time he had Jonnu Smith in Atlanta, he used him and deployed him as a weapon alongside Kyle Pitts, who was another tight end. Both of them doing pretty well for the Falcons, but for terms of fantasy, neither was better than much of a tight end too, and I'm worried about that situation happening here. I think Firemouth benefited last year from volume. Metcalf figures to be the key figure in the passing game. I'm not that bullish on Robert Woods. Probably not a guy I'm making a point to roster in fantasy. I might take in Dynasty, a late end flyer on Roman Wilson, the rookie who really was injured and didn't have much of a role in his first year. Does he have a chance to step up this year? We really don't even know what he is. Calvin Austin, kind of what he is. Wide receiver 7-8 type, playing slot. He'll have a couple of moments, but I'm not getting super excited about that. I think the running game could be good. Caleb Johnson, a very promising rookie prospect out of Iowa, and Jalen Warren is back. Warren, a good pass catcher, but how does that mesh with them having the two tight ends? Warren hasn't typically been the guy that you give a heavy load to on the ground. So Johnson probably the running back I prefer for fantasy. I don't know how great this offense is, but the Steelers are trying to make a run, trying to do better than what they have done. Will it work? I don't know. I still have mixed feelings about this team. Number 3 finishers last year were the Cincinnati Bengals, and had they not had some injuries and a rough start, I think this would have been a powerhouse team. They only finished as 9-8, but they were really soaring at the end, nearly made the playoffs, and they were an incredibly tough out. And you know what? They didn't make a lot of changes. Khalil Herbert, a running back they traded for depth last year, moved on to the Colts. Guard Alex Kappa left. Sheldon Rankins, a defensive tackle, left. They brought back Samaje Perine to be that change of pace, maybe passing game specialist running back. They brought in a linebacker, Oren Burks. The big thing is they worked and kept their guys. Last year, Joe Burrow was QB3. Chase Brown was running back 10. Jamar Chase was wide receiver 1. And T. Higgins, despite missing 6 games, was wide receiver 17. They re-signed Chase and Higgins to long-term deals. That is great news for the Bengals, horrible news for opposing defenses. Andre Iosivas, their number 3 kind of slot guy, wide receiver 68. Mike Gesicki, a real surprise at tight end. They brought him back as well. He finished as tight end 13 last year. Look, Iosivas, Gesicki, they are rosterable. They are interesting pieces, especially if there's injuries, like if Higgins misses more time. Both Iosivas and Gesicki took a little bit of a step up. I love Chase Brown. I think he really proved himself last year. Zach Moss, a good handcuff back, but I think this is about Brown. Burrow, a top 5 option at the position. Jamar Chase, either the best or the second best receiver, depending on how you feel about Justin Jefferson. I really like T. Higgins. I think he has the talent, and in this offense could push to be a wide receiver 1 if he can stay healthy. I like the Bengals a lot. Is this the year they kind of put it together? They made a good draft choice on defense, and they have a good player in Trey Hendrickson. Both of them kind of in a little bit of contract disputes. They brought in Al Golden to run this defense. How is that going to work? Can they get everything settled? They have the pieces, I think, to be successful, and they have probably one of the most intimidating offenses in the NFL. If everything comes together, we could see the Bengals go on another run, similar to how they were a few years ago when they went to AFC Championship games and Super Bowls. Finally, we have the Cleveland Browns. The Browns did not have a good year last year. They finished as 3-14. They had one of the top picks in the NFL. They let go of quarterback Jameis Winston, who's with the Giants. They traded quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who's with the Eagles. They let go of Nick Chubb at running back. He's with the Houston Texans, and Elijah Moore at receiver. He is now with the Buffalo Bills. They brought in a whole bunch of options at quarterback. Deshaun Watson, yes, still on the roster, coming off of 2 torn Achilles tendons, unlikely to be ready for the start of the season, not a lock that he plays at all, and it's becoming increasingly likely that the Browns may be not interested in having him play for them again, so that is something to watch. They brought in veteran Joe Flacco, who was comeback player of the year for them after the 2023 season. They traded for Kenny Pickett, who was a backup for the Eagles last year but was a starter for a while for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They drafted Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel. That gives them 4 other guys competing for that slot. Who's going to land it? That is tough to say. They drafted Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson at running back. Judkins figures to be the number one. They also still have Jerome Ford there in the mix. They brought in wide receiver Deontay Johnson to pair alongside some of the guys they have. They brought in guard Tevin Jenkins, and they brought in DeMonte KZ at safety, coming over from Pittsburgh. Fantasy finishes: Joe Flacco was the Colts last year. He was QB 33. Jerome Ford, running back 33, ended up carrying most of the load most of the season in Cleveland. Wide receiver Jerry Jeudy really exploded, maybe hit the peak of his abilities. Wide receiver 12 last year. Cedric Tillman, we saw fits and starts, but some great flashes, finished as wide receiver 90. David Njoku, tight end 11. The quarterback is a question and a problem. Who ends up being it? It seems to vary from day to day. People say in the locker room they want Joe Flacco. Media reports seem to say they're deciding between Dylan Gabriel and Kenny Pickett to be the week one starter. Deshaun Watson keeps saying he's going to come back and it's his job to lose. He's also mentoring Shadur Sanders, which should scare a lot of people, but sometimes there's a lot of buzz around Sanders, who at one point going to the draft looked like a potential number 2 quarterback prospect, slid all the way to the 5th round, well behind. A lot of options. It is a mess. Preseason is going to tell us something. I like Quinshon Judkins. I like Jerome Ford. I think that they will eat into each other a little bit. I think one probably finishes low-end running back 2, one probably in the running back 3 range. That seems to be a little bit where they are. I wouldn't be surprised, too, if it's a low-end running back 2 and a high-end running back 4. I would bet more on Judkins. I think he's going to be more of the power load, and he's the guy that's probably the future. Jerome Ford, going into a contract year, has been a dependable guy, but he has just been a guy. In the wide receiver room, it's Jerry Jeudy probably as number 1, but Cedric Tillman's there. That makes it interesting. Deontay Johnson, a real question. If he had a horrendous 2024, split among 3 teams, rumors of being an attitude problem. He seems to have worked on that. He's saying all the right things this offseason. He's not that far removed from a good 5-year stretch with the Pittsburgh Steelers. If he can get back into rhythm, he could be a great complement with Jeudy. We could see Jeudy come back to more of the wide receiver 2 range. I think that's really where he's going to end up anyway, maybe even into the wide receiver 3 range. But what does Johnson and Tillman add to this game? I do like David Njoku. I think he's top 12 upside at tight end. They brought in an interesting candidate, Harold Finnan Jr., to join that room. Will they run a few more 2 tight end sets? Hard to say. I think the Browns are trying. I just don't think that they are there when it comes to the rest of the team. So, as I did last time, let's end talking about this division. Last year, the Ravens won the division. Steelers made it into the playoffs. Bengals just missed. Browns well behind. I think it's really a 3-team race for the playoffs again. I think the Browns may be a little better. Maybe they win between 5 and 7 games, but I still don't think they are a winning team. I still think they lack something of an identity. I still think they have some work to do. And it's interesting. I don't really understand what their overall picture is. The question is whether, Aaron Rodgers makes the Steelers significantly better. They were 10-7 last year. They've been around 9 or 10 wins the last few seasons. Never a losing season under Mike Tomlin. I don't think they'll have a losing season this year, but how much better are they? That is a real question. I think the Bengals have potential to be much better if they can stay healthy and they can get some of these contract things settled. They seem to be tracking toward that. They've had a very good offseason in terms of answering some of these long-term questions. I actually like the Bengals quite a bit. I think it's between them and the Ravens for the top of the division, and I think that the Steelers are going to be hanging around, playing some good games, playing a tough schedule, and be in the mix for one of those wild card slots. I wouldn't be shocked if 3 teams from this division make the playoffs. I also think it's probably more likely that it's 2, because you have a couple of good teams going on in the East, you have a couple of good battles going on in the West, and then probably a winner in the South is how I'm feeling about it right now. If I had to bet today, I think the Steelers are going to be on the cusp of being the last in or the first out. And that's just how I feel. I don't think all the changes that they've made make them significantly better, but they don't make them worse. I think they're going to be about the same as they were before. The real question to me is the Bengals, and it comes down to health and whether they can solve these issues. If they can, I think they could go back to being among the contenders in the AFC. Well, that'll do it for me today. Looking at the AFC North, I will be back next week looking at, I believe, the NFC East, which is an interesting and fun division, one that has quite a bit going on. Excuse me, it's the NFC West that we will be looking at next week. Also, a fun division with a lot of competing teams. So, the NFC divisions, I think, are going to have a lot of competition throughout the division with teams hovering around the top. There's going to be a lot of push for the playoffs. Maybe no super dominant teams like there were last year. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We will look at the NFC West next week as we pile our way through here. We are working our way toward the start of the regular season. It is coming up. So until then, hope you guys have an excellent week, and we'll see you next Sunday.